There we go. All right, thank you. Now that we're back from the break and everybody has had a chance to get some caffeine and a snack, I'd like to start out with a little bit of audience participation, if I may. So imagine you live in a homeowners association and they have this really silly rule that states that every homeowner shall own a cuddly pet. So out of the 4 examples that you see there, which are compliant to that regulation? And since I really do want your feedback here, please speak up. You don't need to go to the microphone. Just speak up and tell me which ones and why. We'll take a few. Okay, that's all right. Kind of get it on the inside. All right. Okay, so not the cat. Okay, I agree with you. I'm not a cat person. All right, anybody else? What's that? I heard define cuddly. Okay, exactly, right? Cuddly to me means a cute little puppy. I mean, look, it's adorable. I don't like cats. Porcupines, they just seem really pokey, and then the lizard is just kind of ew. But that's my opinion. That's how I define cuddly, and that's what I value. Now, if I were hypoallergenic, I might actually want like a lizard, or I don't know if a porcupine would be hypoallergenic, but if I really dealt with, oh, sorry, yeah, there we go. But it just depends on what you see as being beneficial and valuable. Now, let's take that and then consider and bring it to something more relevant, like MOSA. So if you don't know what MOSA is, MOSA stands for Modular Open Systems Approach. And according to the definition there, this is pulled from the OUSD RNE website. It's an integrated business and technical strategy to achieve competitive and affordable acquisition and sustainment over the system lifecycle. It has 5 principles or tenets. Several have more technical kind of nature, and some are more business oriented. So with that in mind, or actually before I get there, MOSA is codified in law. This is an excerpt out of the U.S. Code Title 10, Requirement 4401. You can read it there. You can look it up yourself. And then there are other statutes, policies, and guidance in addition to that. You see several other statutes, several policies, several guidance that's coming out from different kind of program executive offices and other DoD guidance. So with all that in mind, consider these 3 examples. Left, middle, and right. Which ones do you think are MOSA compliant? So if we say, I'll go back up 1, MOSA is program offices shall develop and systems that leverage MOSA to the maximum extent practicable to enable incremental development, enhance competition, innovation, and interoperability. So if we go back to this example here, which one is MOSA compliant? Is it the one on the left? Exactly. It depends on what you see as being beneficial. These diagrams don't show what the goals, objectives, and benefits that these individual implementations aim to achieve, and they don't show the cost that it takes to actually achieve them. So yeah, it depends. They might be all compliant. None of them might be compliant. So domain overlay, Ms. Hart, Laura did a fantastic job giving an overview of what that is. I'll just kind of reiterate here. A domain overlay is part of a model-based acquisition RFP package. So if you remember back to our presentation, it's one of the aspects of that. And I'm actually the lead on the MOSA metrics task within the model-based acquisition user group. And my task is to help come up with MOSA metrics. So yes, yay, right. It's a big task. So the domain overlay, it's really a collection of constructs. It's like a pattern that will help support the analysis of a domain-specific concern using a standardized approach. And it has several characteristics that you see there. It has associated regulations, governance, policies, requirements. It has a number of cross-cutting viewpoints, rows, or aspects and columns. It supports specific kinds of analyses with respect to a domain-specific concern. And you see the different kinds of examples there. MOSA is one of those. That's the one I'm heading up. There may be others like cyber, or it are others like cyber, IP data rights, nuclear surety, and you read the list there. And the reason it's called a domain overlay is because it's intended to overlay onto an architectural description, meaning that the underlying or the architecture that's being analyzed doesn't change when you apply the profile. So you apply it, you do the stuff, you analyze it, and you can remove it, and there's no change to the overall architecture. So hence the domain overlay. So I've been collaborating with the group to help come up with a set of MOSA metrics that come underneath this and are part of this domain overlay. Part of that collaboration has been with the NDIA Systems Engineering Division Architecture Committee, specifically Mr. Steve Henry. So Mr. Henry has decades of experience in employing MOSA on numerous systems over their entire life cycles. And he, along with others in the committee, have developed mountains of documents. And this is just like a smattering of those, but it's just a lot of information. And they contain things like, what are the MOSA implementation considerations? You see, if you can read that in one of those documents there, implementation considerations, information needs, and metrics, which is great. And a lot of appendices that help just kind of expand on those ideas. And I'll also thank Mr. Henry because he's been very kind in volunteering his time, going through these different kinds of documents with me and answering my many, many questions. In one of those documents, there's this diagram here, and it's a 7-step process created by Mr. Henry that walks you through developing MOSA metrics. And it starts with the end in mind, where you state what your goals, objectives, and benefits are, the ones that you want to achieve, and then it walks you through how you actually go through applying the MOSA tenets, identifying the derived MOSA requirements, so on and so forth, until you get down to the actual implementation metrics, and then measuring the step number 7 there, measuring the life cycle benefit achievement, and then doing that over time, over the system life cycle, to make sure that you're sustaining actual MOSA value. And then this is a picture of me just really trying to wrap my head around everything because it's all connected. Yeah, I don't smoke, but that's pretty much me a few weeks ago. So, in kind of the output of those, or in the discussions with Mr. Henry, it really stood out to me that MOSA compliance is, and specifically when you think about employing MOSA to the maximum extent practicable in applying the MOSA tenets, it really comes down to optimizing MOSA value delivery. What matters to me in a program office may be different than what's mattered to you, or what matters to you in a program office. We may have different metrics and measures for how we go about evaluating compliance to MOSA. So if we take that value delivery idea, we also want to make sure that the metrics that we choose are bound within the correct context. So they're highly contextualized, these metrics that we have to choose. And that means that we need this framework that allows us to have that end-to-end traceability from goals, objectives, benefits, all the way to the outcomes that are being measured by which you assess MOSA compliance. So I started looking and doing literature reviews on approaches for value delivery that's out there. And I did look at UAF because UAF, as of 1.2, has included these value-related concepts like value streams and value items. But the guidance on how to use them is a little minimal, or it presumes that you know more about business architecture, which I don't. And some of the definitions of like a value stream and a value item point you directly to the business architecture meta model. So that's where I went next. I went to the Business Architecture Guild, who's actually meeting here in this building this week, I believe, and just started looking at their business architecture body of knowledge, their BizBoc, because that's like their compendium of information on everything business architecture. And it has a great section in there on value mapping and value delivery. So how do you create value streams? How do you map those to value items and stakeholders and all that stuff? And the diagram that you see there is just a small subset of the overall meta model that's part of the BizBoc. And it's focusing on value streams, where we say that you have goals that are achieved by objectives. Those objectives target value streams. Value streams are triggered by stakeholders, and those stakeholders desire a value proposition. The value stream itself contains a number of value stream stages that produce value items, and those value stream stages are enabled by capabilities, and those capabilities achieve an outcome. And that's kind of the piece that we're looking at, that outcome aspect. So what's not shown here is the actual measurement aspect. That's not really covered in the business architecture meta model. So we kind of have to build that in. Furthermore, with the business architecture meta model, I think it's the business architecture core meta model. It's actually, I think, standardized by the OMG now, but it doesn't have an accompanying UML-based language profile. In fact, I don't think the core meta model is actually MOF compliant. So it's now on us to try to figure out, well, how do we actually implement these kind of concepts in a standardized language and a framework? So before I get into the implementation aspects, let's look at what are the use cases. Well, from a model-based acquisition kind of perspective, if I'm a program office, I might have two concerns. I have many concerns, but let's just say we have these two. First is, how well does my RFP optimize MOSA value? And then the second is, how well do the proposals that are being submitted to me optimize MOSA value? So with those two concerns in mind, a program office may use the MOSA domain overlay to do three things: discover the applicable MOSA metrics and targets that optimize the MOSA value, provide the incremental status updates on program office MOSA value achievement, and I'll also add sustainment there as well. And then maybe more importantly, provide that traceability. So we want that traceability, the end-to-end traceability from goals to objectives to benefits, all the way down to outcomes, to help justify and provide defense to our decisions. You know, why is my MOSA implementation okay and yours isn't, for instance, or why is mine better than yours? You need some kind of defense, and I believe that comes through this traceability. So a few goals. I've got several up there. I'll just highlight a few of those. To make the domain overlay as usable as possible, I think we need a library of common, reusable, and traced elements. So there's a mountain of information out there, a lot put out by NDIA as well as other offices and organizations. So why can't we take that and begin to build up kind of a standard library where we can reuse these elements? You know, capture the core MOSA tenets, capture the MOSA statutes and many of the other objectives and benefits as well. And then establish traceability through those. That way, that part is already done. So that will help the goal right underneath it, promote information discovery. So we want to give the ability for and reduce the workload on users of the domain overlay in discovering metrics. So I'm imagining like you have the set of all possible goals, objectives, and benefits, but based on your particular choices, how does that begin to filter down to the set that actually matters to you, that you should apply to your own program? So that's part of the information discovery. Now, all of that kind of rests on following established guidance, like the guidance put out by NDIA, Mr. Steve Henry, and implemented in like a guided workflow. So to help make that easier, That guided workflow then flows in and is used by an analysis capability to help you measure actual MOSA value, which is visualized in fit for purpose views, and it's traceable and defensible. And because we don't know everything, nor if we did know everything, we shouldn't put everything into the domain overlay model. So it needs to be tailorable, right, for an office's particular needs. So with those goals in mind, the use cases and the business architecture kind of concepts, this is what I view as an overall conceptual model for the MOSA domain overlay. And it's an eye chart. I don't expect you to, I'm having a hard time myself seeing these little boxes. But I take the business architecture concepts like value streams, value items, stakeholders, and all that, and expand that to include information needs and metrics or measurements that are come out of the NDIA documentation. Then I also add in the idea of cost to achieve measures. So if you have an outcome of some kind of capability that's mapped to a value stream, achievement of that outcome always comes at a cost. So we need to be able to capture, at least qualitatively, the cost to achieve those measures. So we can determine, are we actually producing value? And I think of value simplistically as like benefit over cost. Obviously, it's probably more complicated than that, but that's an easy way to think about it. And lastly, factoring in, well, okay, this is great. We have this all this stuff over on the left. What about actually mapping program-specific system artifacts like an architecture description and programmatic artifacts to it as well? That way we know what we need to measure and then how that maps and feeds into the MOSA domain overlay. So that's factored in there as well. And all of that, every concept in that conceptual model needs to be implemented in a standardized language and a framework as much as possible. So I went through and mapped all of those concepts out of that conceptual model to things in UAF, or at least I attempted to. And I was able to do most of those. UAF does a pretty good job at giving you the ability to express business architecture kinds of concepts like value streams and value items. But there are some gaps. You see there are some blanks in the rows there, but that's to be expected. Like one of the concepts is MOSA value analysis. Actually, how the analysis by which you actually go about computing a MOSA value index. If that's kind of the final output. Well, I don't know how that's going to be done. UAF doesn't have the concept of analysis baked into it that I'm aware of, and it's really more of a pattern. A pattern of how you go about creating this analysis context and concept. So not having a mapping there is okay, in my opinion. And other things like programmatic artifacts and system artifacts, I don't know what those are. I don't know how individual programs will express those different kinds of artifacts. What kind of language? Is it going to be in UAF? Is it going to be in SysML? Is it going to be in something else? I don't know. So I can't necessarily map those to something in UAF. So that's something we still have to figure out. And then there's also a number of relationships in that concept map that need mapping to UAF relationships elements as well. And several of them do, like we map to the achieves relationship, like an actual performer achieves an actual outcome that's well expressed in UAF. Capability performer exhibits the capability that maps to the exhibits relationship, and so on and so forth. And you see it in the list there. There are some others, there's some gaps there. Those have to do with like an actual outcome instantiates measures. Well, if we look at UAF, an actual outcome is an instance, its classifier or type is an effect. And that's more of a meta relationship. So it doesn't really map to a UAF stereotype. And that's okay. But there are some gaps in there that just don't map to something in UAF or SysML, period. And they need to. They need expression in some kind of format. So likely we'll need to go in and create a custom profile with stereotypes that we can apply to these relationships with the appropriate semantics and rules, so that we know that we are able to have that end-to-end traceability that's reflected in that conceptual model. So we start putting all this together and looking towards an implementation. The MOSA domain overlay model, because it has to contain so much contextual information, I think really is a model, not just a profile. That's, with stereotypes that are applied onto an existing architecture. So the idea is that we have a MOSA domain overlay model with stuff that imports in an architecture that's being assessed, or an architecture under assessment, and it's got all the stuff in it that's program specific. It also imports in a MOSA domain overlay library that contains a reusable set of elements that supports use of the domain model or overlay model. And it spans two main domains in UAF, the strategic domain and the resources domain. And it has several, packages in there. This is incomplete. We still have a lot of work to do here, but it's just kind of what we're thinking. We can go ahead and put in a set of MOSA drivers, MOSA goals, objectives. We can put in MOSA benefits as value items, and a lot of other information. We can go ahead and establish all those and establish the relationships between them, so that when you go and you build the actual domain overlay model, a lot of that's already there for you. You just have to use it. So I'm pitching the MOSA domain overlay as an abbreviated business architecture. And the starting point of that is this element. It's a whole life enterprise, and it's called a MOSA endeavoring program. It's a strategic phase type that's out of the MOSA DO library. So whenever you want to start building up and using this MOSA domain overlay, you instantiate that strategic phase type, and then you start filling in the information. There are two types of phases in the MOSA domain, or the MOSA endeavoring program: plan and status. So plan, both of which are temporal. The plan is where you go out and you fill out your MOSA plan. What's the MOSA plan for the life cycle of your system? And then the status is, how do you take incremental statuses of your program over time, where you're measuring the stat or the state of the program against the current state of the plan. Because the plan itself may not be fully matured whenever you need to do a status snapshot. So you just always want to take a status against the current plan. Another thing to point out is that in either case, in the plan or in the status against the plan, value is always delivered through systems lifecycle processes, like those lifecycle processes from the ISO 15288 standard, things like the acquisition process, knowledge management process, project planning, and stakeholder needs and requirements, and there are many, many others. So value is actually achieved or delivered through the execution of those different kinds of system lifecycle activities, and I'm modeling those as value streams. So the idea is this is another eye chart, but this is how it can all start to come together. So if we take as an example this Rambling Wreck acquisitions, it's an instance of a MOSA endeavoring program. It has a plan, and we've already started to take a status snapshot. Within the plan, we start with the acquisition process value stream. And it's pulling, again, it's an instance of one of the types in the library, and it phases this enterprise objective called enhanced competition for high value component cost savings. That itself refines an enterprise goal of enhanced competition, which is motivated by the driver to comply with 10 USC 4401. And there may, and probably would likely, be many layers in between that, but ultimately we want to show that traceability from the objectives that map to the value streams all the way to the different kinds of drivers, and specifically the Title 10 statutes. So the value streams could create value through expressed as value items. Those value items map to concerns, and those concerns express well, the concern for how will that value item actually be measured? And the concern is more formally expressed or refined in terms of measures. And I model those as effects. They have a number of measurements in there that kind of break down and decompose the individual measures into smaller measurements that you can actually put some kind of value to. One thing that we're capturing in there in the effect is cost. So what is the cost to achieve those actual measures? Then going back to the value stream is enabled or phased by a number of capabilities. And those capabilities are exhibited by resource performers. In this example here, I have a capability configuration that exhibits the capability there. And that's what actually desires an actual effect. So the actual effect is where you start to put in target measures. So within your plan, you need to identify, well, what's my goal or what's my target value for MOSA? In this case, one of the metrics that's out of the NDIA documentation is optimized modularity. One of the particular measurements in there is optimized modularity level planning. I can go ahead and set a target value for that. And within the documentation, it's an enumeration with good definitions, so you know what the enumerated values mean. So in the plan, I can go ahead and set that value, and I can set a cost for what I think it will take to achieve that value. And then moving on in time, when I'm ready to take a snapshot, I create a status phase and start plugging in some of the information. I take instances of those resource performers and start filling in actual outcomes. And those actual outcomes are the actual values. So how is my architecture under assessment, which is being mapped to the things in the domain overlay model? How are they doing? Am I meeting my target values that I set in the plan? In this example, I don't know if you can see it or not, it actually isn't. It's not performing as well as what we had planned. So what do we need to do? What changes do we need to make in order to make sure that we are achieving and sustaining MOSA value? So a simplified process there. 2 minutes? Okay. All right. I got to hurry. We have a simplified process there. It really just walks through the steps that I just walked through there. And this will be implemented in a guided workflow. That way it'll walk you through these steps. And finally, in summary, developing a system that employs MOSA to the maximum extent practicable is hard. It's not easy, but we can do hard things. This is a picture from my baby girl. It's posted on our fridge at home. So if she can do hard things, she's 6, we can do hard things too. All right. Thank you.
All right, we'll take a few questions. Just a second, we take a few questions.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment that so doing this strategic planning of understanding where you're going to get the value applying MOSA instead of applying MOSA, nose to tail all the way down the stack. Another part of the cost is, and it's tightly tied to MOSA, is the IP data rights. Where to apply the data rights that you really will use and get, impact your capability versus applying the data rights just in case.
Sure.
So I know you're going to put that in there later, probably.
It should. Yeah, definitely be in there.
Questions?
Hi, can I ask a question?
Sure. Yes, go ahead.
On the phone or in person? Are you asking, is this me on the phone that you want the question from?
Yeah, online, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I had put some comments in the chat. One of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around, and I would recommend, is MOSA is a means to an end, right? So ultimately, the business case of the organization is what drives how much MOSA, if you will, right? How cuddly, like in your analogy earlier, right? It depends on what the consumer wants to get out of that, right? If you want to have happiness, better health, all of those things, then you say which of those 4 options will give you the better rating on those measuring sticks, right? So that I didn't get that sense. It's kind of the mission use case of of MOSA. It's not MOSA for the sake of MOSA, just like Agile for the sake of Agile. Agile is a means to an end, right? It's a streamlining, execution. But here, it's MOSA is to enable something, so that something is really what drives the value of MOSA, right?
Right.
Copy. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. It's all about maximizing and optimizing that MOSA value.
But not for the sake of so that's what I'm saying. How do you know this is good enough? How do you set your targets is kind of what I'm getting at, right? The target is to say, what am I trying to achieve as an organization, whether it's a business or the military or whoever, and then say, now based on what I'm trying to achieve as an outcome from my mission goals, now how much MOSA do I need so that I can rack and stack various attributes of MOSA against each other, right?
Yeah, I imagine that those measurements are related to each other. So you can think of like a huge parametric model, system of equations where all of these measurements are related to each other. So how do you balance those equations and also factor in objective priorities as well? So,
yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. Oh, sure. Okay.
Laurie, actually, you just I my question there. First of all, I appreciate this very much because folks who try to deal with MOSA understand that the way to deal with a really complex problem is to add another constraint. No, but really, truly, seriously though, you have to create the context so that you can eliminate some variables, right? I mean, this is the idea is you have to know what you're trying to do in order for you to figure out how you want to measure. What would you say to the organizations that don't want to accept that and say, I want to maximize my MOSA-ness, and so I don't want you to constrain how it's being used at the program level, because like the only way I've found that makes any sense is the and you pointed out really well, is the value proposition. You can use that. Is there anything else that's come up, anything you've seen that might be another way to try to help? Hey, look, tell me what you want to measure so I can tell you how to measure it, or any ideas? Because this is great.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what do you benefit, or what do you want to see as a benefit and an outcome? What do you value? So, and whenever you go and want to achieve one of those benefits, like if you want to maximize MOSA, if you want everything to be modular, everything to be open, that's likely going to come at a high cost, or it may come at a high cost. So I think you do have to factor in the cost aspect as well.